What if everything you believed about governing a nation to achieve sustained prosperity turned out to be entirely wrong? Not partially wrong, not debatable, but empirically contradicted by one of the most dramatic national transformations in human history. That deeply uncomfortable question sits at the very center of the West's complicated, rarely examined relationship with China today. Answering it honestly means challenging assumptions embedded in nearly all of mainstream modern Western political thought and foreign policy theory. The prevailing view across America and much of the Western world is that China's continued rise represents a fundamental threat, not simply a geopolitical threat, but something more unsettling at its core. China is succeeding under Communist Party rule. It is innovating rapidly, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty, and reshaping the entire global economic order. According to democratic theory guiding Western foreign policy for decades, this simply should not be possible without political freedom. Political freedom, a free press, and the vote are supposed to be essential preconditions for dynamic innovation and lasting prosperity. China has none of those protections in any Western sense, and yet here it stands, stubbornly defying the established theory. This is why Western distrust of China runs so deep, and why it is rarely examined honestly on its own terms. The anxiety is not really about missiles or trade imbalances or military expansion, though all of those certainly play a role. The anxiety is about what China's success implies for democracy as a universal prescription for all nations and peoples. That buried question drives almost every Western conversation about China, yet it is almost never stated plainly or directly. To discuss it plainly, one must carefully separate two very different questions that are routinely collapsed into a single one. The first question is democracy a better system than one-party rule? That answer is not seriously disputed by anyone. Democracy, with its protections for rights, peaceful power transfers, and accountability structures, is clearly the superior system of governance. But the second question is entirely different. Would China, right now today, benefit from an overnight democratic transition? That question demands a far more careful, evidence-based, historically informed answer than Western political discourse typically provides or attempts. Chinese leaders studying this problem are not indifferent to the historical evidence visible all around them throughout the modern world. They watched Yugoslavia attempt rapid democratization and descend swiftly into nationalist violence, ethnic cleansing, and total catastrophic state collapse. Millions of lives were destroyed in that collapse. It was studied in extraordinary detail by Chinese foreign policy analysts. They watched Russia with even greater attention because Russia's democratic transition happened in real time at a comparable national scale. What followed in Russia was not liberation and prosperity. Life expectancy dropped sharply. Infant mortality rose to alarming levels. The economy collapsed entirely. People who had been poor before became desperate. That lesson was studied carefully in Beijing. Then there is the evidence from China's own extraordinary trajectory across the past 4 remarkable and transformative decades of growth. 40 years ago, ordinary Chinese citizens could not freely choose their own clothes or decide where to live or work. There were no private automobiles on Beijing streets, only bicycles. Foreign travel was strictly reserved for senior government officials. Not a single Chinese student was enrolled at any American university. Then, today, well over 300,000 are. The vast majority of those students return home by their own choice, not compulsion, after completing their degrees abroad. 120 million Chinese citizens travel internationally every year, freely, with valid passports, and return home willingly. The Beijing streets, that once held only silent bicycles, now lock in constant traffic jams of private automobiles. The low buildings gave way to dramatic skylines. China produced the world's largest middle class within a single generation. This ascent came from what was, within living memory, a nation suffering widespread and profound rural poverty with few prospects. By almost any measure of human welfare, the last 4 decades represent the best period in 4,000 years. 4,000 years of recorded civilization, and this moment stands clearly apart. The scale of transformation is genuinely staggering. And then there is the innovation. This is perhaps the most disorienting fact of all for classical democratic theorists. The theory says clearly, without political freedom and a free press, people cannot think creatively or challenge authority meaningfully. Innovation requires open societies. China, the theory predicts, should be stagnant. Instead, it stands among the world's most innovative economies. Mobile payments replace cash so thoroughly that foreign visitors fumble with bills while everyone around them transacts with a phone tap. Food delivery arrives hot at your door with a precision that puts many supposedly advanced countries to absolute shame. Advances in artificial intelligence, supercomputing, and space exploration have placed China among the world's most technically capable nations. These fields require not just resources, but genuine ingenuity, creativity, and sustained intellectual ambition. China delivers on all counts. The theory predicts one thing. The observed facts show another. At that point, a fundamental choice must be made. One can either cling to the existing theory or pay honest attention to the facts unfolding before the world. This does not mean China's system is without cost. The absence of individual political rights is not trivial. The point is something more specific and practically important than a sweeping moral judgment about political systems or freedoms. The assumption that China will buckle under Western pressure and adopt democratic governance is not strategic realism. It is wishful thinking. It is also a fundamental misreading of what is actually happening inside China, among both its leadership and its citizens. Chinese leaders are unlikely to interpret decades of unprecedented improvement in human welfare as evidence their approach has actually failed. One can be nearly certain that China will not alter its political structure on the advice of the United States. China will continue on the path it has chosen, driven by its own reading of history, evidence, and national experience. The more urgent question is not how to change China. It is whether the West can accept genuine coexistence. Can the United States and its allies come to terms with a large, successful, and fundamentally different nation alongside them? That requires letting go of the idea that China must collapse or reform into something familiar before engagement becomes possible. It requires changing the language, concepts, and assumptions that have guided Western thinking about China for an entire generation. Because the current framework is not describing the world as it is. It describes the world Western theory expected, and those two worlds, the theoretical and the actual, have come apart in ways that can no longer be ignored.